welcome to this 1 hour crash course in German policy and where we are in Germany at the moment. We are we are glad that we have the German ambassador to Norway with us this morning, Detlef Wächter. He has been in Norway the last 2 years, came August 2022. Have been posted in many different countries. In Cairo, Helsinki, you have been in NATO, Washington, were also ambassador to Tanzania, and you were responsible for security policy and NATO in Kanzleramt, and you also worked in the Ministry of Defense. So, we are looking very much forward to hear your reflections on what Financial Times wrote the 7th of November this year, barely 12 hours after Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential elections. His America First policy claimed his first European victim with the collapse of the German coalition government. I don't know if they are right, if it has something to do with Trump, but at least we are going to have new elections in Germany 23rd of February next year. Very much looking forward to listen to you, Detlef.
Thank you very much, Kate. Financial Times is usually right, but I wouldn't go that far in this case. We're a close friend of the United States of America, and no reason to collapse as a government once they have presidential elections, but we'll get back to that at a later stage. So, Kate, thanks very much for setting this meeting up. I think it gives us a wonderful opportunity to spend 1 hour on Germany. And thank you, everyone, for showing up at this early hour. I really appreciate that. The title of this morning session is Quo Vadis Germany. That by nature is a forward-looking issue, what is going to happen. But I think in order to understand what will be happening after the elections on the 23rd of February, it makes sense to take a quick look into the rear mirror in order to understand why we are there where we are at the moment. And I'm speaking here in front row under the strict supervision of your former ambassador to Berlin. Sven Svedman is here and he'll correct everything I'll be saying at a later stage. I hope not. Now, in December 2021, a very delicate coalition was formed in Germany. I think it's fair to say that. First of all, 3 parties, which was a first in Germany, and very different parties. The classic social democratic SPD, Arbeiterpartie, a market liberal FDP, and the Greens. And they succeeded a conservative government that was in power for 16 years. Progress coalition, as they had called themselves back in 2021, was history. There are reasons for it, and being an ambassador, I have to be a little careful, but not too careful. It's Germany after all, and not North Korea. Coalition treaties in Germany are very much unlike platforms as you have in the US or in this country. Coalition treaties in my country are 150 pages full of stipulations and timetables and things they want to get done before the next election date. And then 2 dates, of course, happened, which were unforeseen for this coalition. First, of course, was the 24th of February in 2022, well known to everyone here in the audience. Not so well known, but probably even more decisive for the fate of this coalition was the 15th of November in 2023. That was a constitutional court ruling on the German budget, and it ruled this budget unconstitutional, and that was unheard of for the very reasons that the government had dedicated 60 billion euros from a corona fund to a climate fund, and that was an unconstitutional rebudgeting. All of a sudden, overnight, 60 billion were missing in the German budget, and the very day of this constitutional court ruling, an intense debate as to priorities in that German government started climate, defense, social welfare, and from this debate, this coalition actually never ever recovered again. Both change had really changed the reality under which this government had been founded, and they did not find a way around that bump in the road. This coalition agreement, 150 pages, which they really worked intensively on, had no more or little bearing to reality. And all this, and we must not underestimate that, was fueled then by an unprecedented migration crisis in my country. And it was fueled, of course, as a consequence by devastating election results in the East German Delstater for the coalition parties. And I guess we come back to that maybe in the discussion, because that caused major alarm, would say worldwide, but in Europe and certainly in this country, if you look at the media this autumn after the elections in Turin, in Brandenburg, and in Saxony. So this was too much, and the government broke down indeed the very day Donald Trump was elected into office. But now the look ahead. What will be happening immediately? We'll have early elections. It's not unheard of in Germany to start with. It happened before in 1983 and in 2005. 2 times a social democratic-led government had broken down. We'll have a vote of confidence on the 16th of December. After all is said and done, the Chancellor will lose that vote of confidence, which is intended. Then he'll go up to the President, say, Mr. President, we need to dissolve Parliament. Parliament cannot do that itself, but the President does. And then after 60 days, maximum 60 days, we'll have new elections, and everyone has agreed on the 23rd of February. And then we would expect a new government being in place around Easter, probably somewhat after Easter, end of April, beginning of May. So it's half a year from now. It's substantial, but it's not a disaster. Now, I've got no crystal ball, but if you look at the polls at the moment, you see the Conservative Party at around 33%, the partly extremist AfD around 18-19%, second strongest party. SPD is doing poorly at the moment, 15%, the Greens 12%, Liberals just under that 5% threshold, which would kick them out of parliament. We'll see how that ends up. And there is a new party called Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, named after its founder, a lady from East Germany. They are rather left or right, but they are former Communist Party. At the moment, they are both out of parliament, as the polls say, but we'll see how that ends up. One thing I really want to say, because it has been sort of depicted in the media, I don't think, in some media, not accurately. We won't have any of these extremist party in the next federal government. This is almost 100% sure. We'll have them in parliament in considerable numbers, so AfD will do well, but they will not be in the government. The next government will be formed by probably 2 of the 4 democratic, more centrist parties, CDU, SPD, Liberals, or Greens. If you look at the polls today, probably it's not hard to suggest that it will be a government that is led by the conservative CDU, that is Angela Merkel's old party, and that name alone usually sounds reassuring to many audiences abroad. Domestically, what will be the course, depending a little bit on the composition of the government, but if it is CDU and SPD or CDU and Green Party, I think the big tasks that lie ahead next German government is really to reconcile the social welfare state with competitiveness of German business and industry, bring it back into more balance, some people would suggest, do away with our bureaucracy that hampers business and industries continue and keep on with the green transition. I think it's very important to say that it's not a hobby horse of the Green Party alone. All the parties are dedicated to the green transition, but probably with a little bit of a different approach, less state-driven, less centralized, more realistic when it comes to the goals we can achieve short-term, and more technology open. Next government will implement decisive step against migration, illegal migration, which is of grave concern to everyone back home. And that could imply, and we'll see how that turns out in the next coalition, sending back migrants who have no perspective to be illegally admitted to Germany under the asylum regulations, send them back at the German border. So the EU Dublin provisions about refugees and migration must fully apply. On foreign policy and Germany in the EU and in NATO, I guess we need to say that it's not up to Germany alone to make sure that the EU is continuing to functioning, that NATO is not falling apart, that autocracies get the upper hand. But of course, my country will have a say in it. It is, after all, the leading economic power in Europe, and a country, many consequential decisions will be depending on. I think this is for sure. Here I would say I have reassuring messages for you. Of course, I cannot say whether all that turns out the way we would love to see it, but I would say that everyone in that next government, all the democratic parties, are fully aware of our role and responsibility as the leading European power, and are also aware of responsibilities and expectations from friends and partners and from foes. EU. Every next German government will closely work with the new commission in Brussels, which is about to be set up as we speak, under a German commissioner, which makes life for us easy in a way, and an EPP, People's Party, conservative majority in the European Parliament. Also, that matters. There's a lot of unity between probably the next German government, majority in Parliament, and the head of the Commission, for cohesion of the European continent that is or seems to be drifting apart in parts. We will work for a rollback against those who flirt with autocrats and anti-democrats. We don't want another EU. We want an EU that is sustaining its meaningful position next to the other big blocs that are there or that are emerging. Talking about the US, we're talking about China, and we're talking about the global south, and how important that is to retain its role also vis-a-vis with and vis-a-vis the global south. Shows that community that we read yesterday in Rio de Janeiro, where we'd have loved to see other focuses maybe, or things put differently when it comes to Hamas aggression against Israel, for example, or the attack of Russia against Ukraine, where the language in that community was not very much to our liking. When it comes to NATO, this president, the next president, will make our life more difficult than the former one. That we expect. 2% has always been the issue. Germany was not very good at it this year for the first time ever. Since the World War, of course, and since the end of the Cold War, we reached the 2% goal, which is where we did not live up to rightful expectations from our allies, and especially from our most important ally in Washington, like Norway, by the way. And it's in retrospective unacceptable that two rich countries like Norway and Germany never reached that 2% goal until 2024. Well, we'll have no choice. You did it this year, we did it this year. We need to continue to work towards that end, and we need to do more. 2% is actually not the debate any longer. If you listen to our Minister of Defense, if you listen to our Minister of Foreign Affairs, 2% is the baseline. We're talking about 3% now, not because someone tells us to do so, section of NATO or an American president, because we look at how good are we in defense today, what do we need to achieve, and what is the price tag for it. And that is rather 3% than 2%. That will be an uphill battle. 3% would probably mean we've got a defense budget of 58 billion euros today. So we would need to reach, depending on our GDP, somewhat close to 80 billion euros annually. This is quite a stretch, and it will be no easy task for the next government to get there, but everyone agrees on the aim as such. I'm not that afraid of NATO because we've got a very good Sec-Gen in Brussels. He is as best as it gets. Second probably only to his Norwegian predecessor. And he showed us how to, in a spirit of partnership, deal with the most important ally back then, President Trump in Washington. And I think we as NATO, and actually Stian Jensen said it at a meeting of the Atlantic Council a couple of weeks back, we have achieved a lot and we can present a lot to more critical allies, including the one in Washington. We've come to 2%, we'll do more. We now take defense seriously. We get no more Russian gas. At least Germany does not get, and we won't get back there at some point. I would rule that out. And we have done, on top of what we achieved financially, we've really altered the course of defense in Europe. We are making sure, together with other European, and in this case the Canadian allies, that the eastern border of the alliance are safe and secure, and that there's a credible deterrent. We'll be prepositioning 5,000 German troops in that heavy armored Panzerbrigade Litauen, together with our Norwegian friends who have been there with us from day one, with the enhanced forward presence. And in turn, German soldiers will be more and more represented in the Norwegian North Mounted Infantry, but also including the Navy and other contingents from German armed forces. So everyone needs to see, and I think people begin to see, that we're talking about a different NATO than back in 2016, 2017, and this will be having an effect on everyone in the alliance. Ukraine. A lot of people ask us what happens in Ukraine. Well, what happens if the Americans are more reluctant? Is Germany able to step up to the plate? Well, not to the extent people would, President Zelensky would love to see that. The assistance of the United States is irreplaceable, but there will be a continued German support of Ukraine. We are already the second strongest supporter of Ukraine. We will continue to be that. We will make sure that there is no negotiated solution to the conflict without consent of Ukraine. We will make sure that every negotiated or diplomatic solution of the conflict takes fundamental interests of the Ukrainian people into account. And there was some criticism on the phone call the Chancellor 3 days ago had with the Russian president, something that hadn't been taking place for 2 years. It's fair to criticize the very fact that he called, but if you look at the readout and if you look at the inconvenient truth the Russian president was confronted with by the German Chancellor, I think there's no reason to believe that we'll be not taking a very, very firm pro-Ukraine and anti-Russian aggression course in the future. Then about the Middle East, there's one thing I need to say, and that usually doesn't go well with Norwegian audiences, but I say it anyway. We'll continue to strongly support the state of Israel, including weapons and military material, while at the same time having a frank dialogue with the Bibi Netanyahu government as to where the limits are of what we are ready to accept. And that is, of course, the humanitarian obligations of Israel in Gaza. That is the responsibilities that come with the role of an occupying power in general, especially in the West Bank. And of course, the two-state solution as a long-term goal and as the only solution for this part of the Middle East. Now, I've talked about the transatlantic relationship a couple of times. That will be probably a challenge. I'm not belittling that. The cabinet proposals or nominations by the president-elect, they raise questions in Berlin and beyond. I would say that those in charge of security and external relations, Secretary of State and the National Security Advisors are well-known people to everyone in Berlin. It will be a relationship of tough love, but they are two transatlanticists. People who know about the value of alliances and that the United States are stronger with countries like Norway and Germany by their side. We need to see what the next trade secretary is up to. It wasn't easy last time, and it won't be easy this time. I think we are much better prepared than last time. Last time we were taken a bit by surprise, to be honest. We were not properly prepared. We thought a Donald Trump victory was out of question. We had 8 years now to establish a relationship with the mega universe and representatives of that mega universe. We know that the Europeans should shoulder more of the burden and should have a more meaningful part of the burden sharing. And we actually have, and I've already touched upon that, already multiplied our efforts since 2017. And then I would always say US and Germany, and same goes for Norway, US and Norway are more than just a federal government. It's thousands of businesses that have interests in doing good business with one another. It's people to people. It's German, Delstaater and US states, which is actually pretty important. It's a wide network of institutions. It's a very, very, and don't underestimate that, close military to military cooperation with meaningful US headquarters in Germany and other European cities. And this is a structure you cannot do away with in 4 years. This is a no-go. People tried that before and it does not work, even if they wanted to. It doesn't go away overnight. And when it comes to businesses and future of green transition, the Paris Climate Agreement and all that stuff, I can't tell you exactly where this will be going in the immediate future, but we clearly see that even very red states in the United States, like Texas and Oklahoma, businesses have come up to the president and say, well, don't draw back on the green transition because we profit from it. Countries like, or companies like Exxon, like Chevron, Phillips 66, I've read actually this morning, have heavily invested in something that is well known to everyone in this room, into CCS and solar energy. Solar is now way more expensive in the United States than fossil energies. And this will have an effect on politics if people make their voice heard. And just solar, to make a point for it, because it's such an important energy resource now for the US, is 100% more, and it's way cheaper compared from 2024 to 2021. All this will have an effect if the dust settles. And then, of course, China is an issue, and China is also something that plays into the transatlantic relationship. We'll see a very China-critical administration in Washington, and you look at where we stand on China today, where we stood on China, let's say back in 2015, 2016, you've seen a much stricter course on China. We are way less naive when it comes to Chinese involvement in German businesses, in German universities, in German technology. We have tried, maybe not enough yet, but we have tried to become way more resilient than we were, with a view on supply chains and technologies. Taxes and all those related issues will be probably the hardest issues across the Atlantic. But I don't want to sound boring because I say everything is going to be all right. But there's at least a fair chance that we'll get that issue settled as well if we make ourselves clear and if we work hard for it, that the European Union is still an economic superpower, that we are totally open to negotiate everything on taxes and German commodities exported to the US, but rather today way more produced already in the United States, if you look at the German automotive industries. But then I would also say Europe is not without means of defense. We can retaliate as a big economic bloc if need be. And on the bilateral cooperation with our Norwegian friends, there is perfect consensus across the aisle in Germany that Norway is an indispensable partner. We are the biggest trade partner to Norway. You are the most important energy supplier for us. We continue to cooperate in the green infrastructure despite the setback on the hydrogen pipeline recently, where the Norwegian side pulled the plug, which we did not like. We'll continue, as I said, to work on our military cooperation across the eastern border of the alliance in Lithuania. We have a unheard of, unprecedented cooperation when it comes to submarines, which we developed together, and we are perfectly ready to repeat that exercise with frigates. And the decision by the Ministry of Defense yesterday to have us graciously on the shortlist for this acquisition. We're a good company with our French and British and American friends. Makes us believe that this is also a wonderful perspective. And there's a strategic thing that ties us together. If we look at NATO today and NATO before 2022, we now more than ever regard the entire alliance territory as of interest for a country in the very heart of Europe. We have a continuous potential line of conflict from the Black Sea over the Baltic Sea to the North Atlantic. That means for a strategist in Germany, a country like Norway is way more in the background of our political and military thinking than it used to be before 2022. To sum up, and then I'm very much looking forward to a discussion. Internally, we've got a job to do. We have to reconcile the welfare state with more competitiveness. As I said, the green transition will continue in probably a bit of a different fashion. We have to really unleash again the energy of our industry, which will lead to hopefully less spending and more income. And abroad, NATO will be okay. We'll need to continue with our meaningful burden sharing. We'll have an open dialogue with our American friends on a couple of issues. We'll help, if there's the time for that, to end the war against Ukraine, taking fully into account, and it is very important that I keep on repeating that, Ukrainian interests, and will help the EU to the extent we can to remain an indispensable power in the international arena. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being so open with us and telling us how you reflect on the current situation in Germany and also in the Transatlantic partnership. I will just start with a couple of questions, and then I will let the audience ask you the last questions. One on the internal scene. Could you explain to us why Germany is so obsessed about the Schwarze Null? No debt. Most countries have debt to put into their public sector. Because this was a part of why the coalition government ended up in the situation they are now.
Yeah. I hate to correct you.
Okay.
We don't have a Schwarze Null at the moment. We've made debts.
Yeah.
For the present budget, we've raised 50 billion euros on the capital market. That is debt.
Okay.
We have a so-called debt brake. It's an untranslatable word, Schuldenbremse.
Yeah.
That means we can only sort of 3% of the budget we can take new debts. That we always do. You can take 3% from your savings account, pension fund. We can raise it on the capital market, little difference. Yeah. Well, and we have at some point, back in 2011, I think it was a across-the-aisle decision of our major political forces in Germany to say we cannot live at the expense of future generations. A very wise thing, sounds familiar to Norwegian audiences, I guess. And we said we have, for 2024, we had an income of 1 trillion euros. You know, you get confused with all the zeros. So with 1,000 billion euros, it is an awful lot of money. And a government should be in a position with wise spending to live with that and, to reprioritize if things go rough and not just go to the capital market again and say we need more money, which we need to pay back at some point, which again restricts the room of maneuver for a government. So this is why back then in 2011 they said we need to do something about it. We invented this tool. Now there is a debate going on as to whether we can reform it. Means more than 3% of investments or of debts could be raised in case the investment is used for real investment in defense and infrastructure. In education, for example, but not in more welfare, not in more spending for consumptive purposes. And this is the actual debate. And people who are fervently in favor of sticking to the debt brake usually say, if we start reforming it, we'll open the box of Pandora and we'll get it closed. We won't get it closed again. And this is why we should be applying the utmost care about even talking about reform. I don't know how that plays out in the next government. Social Democrats, part of them are in favor of it. Now, a couple of days back, the chairman of the Conservative Party sort of opened the door a little bit and said, well, if it's for investive purposes, we can always talk about it at least. And the Liberal Party is fervently against it, Green Party. So we see how that plays out, but I wouldn't see a flooding. You don't open the door and flood the country with more debts. It will be a very, very focused reform, if at all. But back to your question, why are we so hesitant about it? Because we are heavily indebted already, not as many other European countries, but still we find it considerable, and we should be living as a government with wide spending and prioritizing on what we have, and that is an awful lot.
This also goes to the European level, in a way. Reading Mario Draghi's report about the lack of competitiveness, innovation in the European Union, and one of his suggestions is that we have to use, or you have to use 800 billion euro a year to put into the European economy. And that will, of course, also raise the question of joint debt in the European Union. and I know Germany is against. Could you explain a little bit about the discussion with this change with the new government?
Yeah, I don't think that will change. There is consensus. Look at the figure alone, 800 billion. This is impossible. Our budget is 400 billion.
Yeah.
And the discussion is along the same party lines or political ideologies in Germany. Those who are who think we desperately need more spending in order to get our infrastructure right, to remain competitive and all that stuff. They had nothing but praise for the Draghi report. Those who are for different opinion cautioned expectations here and said, it is one view and we need to take it on board, and it's a contribution to an ongoing discussion in Brussels and member states' capitals, but it's not a done deal. And I would always say, for the reasons I tried to explain in response to your first questions, that we would be hesitant to translate the Draghi report one into German politics and into a German budget. First, because it's technically not possible. Second, because it's a philosophy thing which comes into play here.
I would end by asking you about the Zeitenwende, the whole new policy following, 3 days just after Russia attacked Ukraine. Scholz held his famous speech. And how far have you managed to adopt all the points that he was pointing to, the Sondervermögen, the 2%, and the whole reform process in the Bundeswehr? Could you tell a little bit about that? And then I will take your questions. Please give me a sign.
I mean, depending on whom you ask, but in this case you ask me, so I give you my... Is it a personal answer? I don't know. I give you an answer as ambassador and as Detlef Wächter, as good as I can do that. And because after 22, I was still, for the Berlin government circles in the Ministry of Defense, and Zeitenwende was the issue, and one of my issues was to somehow implement it, at least for the Ministry of Defense. And in retrospective, I know, Kate, that you're very critical about us really following up on the Zeitenwende. I'm a little more optimistic in retrospective that we got a lot of things right. If you look at the budget issue, and we talked about it, we're not talking about 2% any longer. We're talking about 3%.
Yeah.
We've been talking about, and that was a German credo. And, if you said otherwise, you were in dire straits. No weapons into conflict zones. It was a very naive policy, but one, you could apply with Germany's past and all that. Norway had a bit of the same policy.
Exactly.
I would also say, it's a very moral course, but maybe not always applicable to the real world. We've done away with it. We've sent many very sophisticated weapons into a conflict zone, and that is Ukraine defending itself against Russian aggression. And that will have consequences for our future policy on weapons export. Energy policy, something friends and partners have been criticizing us for with a lot of good reasons, that we depended, actually unheard of, that we depended so much on Russian gas, even after 2014, after the first attack on Crimea. Nord Stream 2, a favorite issue between US administrations and us, for example, or between Polish administrations, Małgorzata, and Berlin, was Nord Stream 2. And that was not a thing, we invented after the Cold War or something in the Yeltsin times. It was after 2014. And we were aware that the German business model worked on the basis of cheap Russian gas.
Yeah.
We would produce wonderful stuff in Germany and could sell it at compatible prices worldwide. So a little bit, this wonderful German business model, which made us rich, doesn't work any longer, and we feel the heat now, we feel the consequences. But we did it anyway, right? No more Russian gas comes to Germany. Much more expensive Norwegian gas comes to Germany, which is good. In a way, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, you have the same.
Oh, it's still cheap.
Define cheap. Define cheap. You can say it has been a war economy and not a market economy. So, The Economist. You mentioned The Economist. No, you mentioned Financial Times. The Economist talked about Kriegsgewinnler. We never did that, actually. No.
Yeah.
Seriously, we were very, very grateful that you stepped up to the plate and you actually increased the delivery of gas to Germany by around 10%. Without that, we couldn't have done. Then we bought LNG from elsewhere. We did things in record time.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the immediate consequences of the Russian aggression, the Zeitenwende, is well done. The 100 billion euros are already not spent but under contract. What we see is that it was not enough. When I heard the Zeitenwende speech, I was actually on a highway back from somewhere, and I stopped by the motorway.
Yeah.
I had to stop because I had to listen to this speech. No one knew about it. No one knew about the contents, and I was overwhelmed by what I heard. The 10% and the 100 billion and the sophisticated weapon systems. And I think we lived up to that expectation. But now it's 1,000 days after the Zeitenwende speech, and we see we need to do more, and we need to a little be creative and intelligent about a diplomatic solutions, and that will be as hard as it gets. But until we get there, we need to support Ukraine with everything we have, because Mr. Zelensky must be in a powerful negotiation position when he's sitting down at the table with President Putin.
I'm not that critical, Detlef. I'm just my job is to look point after point what you have achieved. And when I was listening to the Zeitenwende speech, it was a sunny, wonderful Sunday. It was when I was meant to go skiing, but I was so shocked. So I was just sitting in my living room the whole day, watching what was going on in Bundestag. So it was a very special speech, and they promised a lot, and you have done a lot. But the world has changed, and I think probably what we will face together with the new administration in the US is China as an upcoming challenge. How we are going to manage an actor that is using our rule-based system, but cheating in a way when they are selling their electrical cars in Europe and so forth. And for Germany, that will be problematic, I guess.
It will be. So far, Chinese cars in Germany are still very limited, 1,000 per year or something.
Yeah.
We can cope with that. But no, I don't want to belittle that. It is an upcoming challenge. And German automotive industry, which is so important for everything in Germany, needs to be a little more creative on what they do. I think they've got the potential. But things that are happening at the moment can also be a wake-up call, as the February 2022 events were a wake-up call. We get wake-up calls on a daily basis because the world is getting more competitive. People wake up, and the G20 thing was a wake-up call. It's not the Americans and the French and the Brits and us sitting together and writing a communique, and the others say excellent idea. It's the other way around. President Lula said it's the social welfare agenda that needs to be front and center of the communique, and then we might talk about Ukraine, and we might talk about Hamas and Israel. It's a changed reality, and this is why I said, we need to stick together as friends in the European Union and in NATO, and outside the European Union with the close partners we have worldwide, and the closest partner is this country.
And the UK, maybe.
Absolutely.
Sven Svedman, you will get a microphone because,
Thank you for a very interesting introduction. I'm not amazed. I have a question about the formation of government. We have a long history in Norway with minority governments as well. And this discussion is going on in Germany. Because when I was in Berlin, I was asked, and I said, no, this is impossible in Germany to have a minority government. How do you look at that? Because after these elections have been held, the campaign will be between parties, one party against another, which will eventually have to build a government. So it's a pretty tough few months where they will actually fight on the social issues, on the defense issues, competitive issues, and then they will have to form a coalition. Either two, and if it's two, it's the SPD and the CDU, or three, and the Greens, and they are fairly different. How do you see the prospects for forming a government? Would a minority government be possible? And the issues, how do you see these issues developing? In the worst possible of times, you will have a German government which will be for a long period in an election campaign. And you have a new president coming in. And from day one, he can start with his policies. So it's the worst possible period. How do you see the defining issues in the campaign in the months ahead?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sven. We take one more. Is it okay? Tone Ran? Time is running.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I would appreciate your views on the German-French axis, which has been very important in the European Union for many different sorts of developments. And then I would also appreciate if you could give certain indications on the official German view on the revision of the Russian nuclear doctrine. Thank you.
Okay. One internal and one external question.
Yes. On the internal, Sven, thank you. We have a minority government at the moment. Basically, people say it's caretaker government, which is actually factually not correct. I would say it's a minority government. You would say, what's new? You know, we have that all the time. And it works sort of okay. It's a no-go in my country. I don't know why. It's not going to happen. We wouldn't find the one party that says, you know, we sort of in that half coalition with you and support you whatever it takes, given that you do us a favor from time to time. I don't know why that is, to be quite frank. We never thought about it. Angela Merkel has thought about it at some point. In 2017 or something, when things were getting rough, and she said it won't factually work, and a big country like Germany needs a clear majority that finds itself on a basis of this coalition treaty and that is bound to it, and if it wants to depart from it, it has to leave government, and we have what we have at the moment, and that is early elections. So I don't see that. You made a point about 3 parties in the next government. I would still think this is not going to happen. We have 3 parties already because CDU is the friendly Bavarian sister party, which can then make their life difficult from time to time. But it's organization-wise, it's one party. So I see a coalition between the Conservative Party and either the Green Party or SPD. If you look at the polls, it works fine. We've got a new election system, which would probably lead to the fact that with 43% of the popular vote, you have a majority of seats in parliament. And I don't see that in these remaining 95 days to the election date, something so terribly could happen that CDU and one of the other parties wouldn't get to those 40-something%. And if it's 3 parties after all, it will be more difficult. Around the issues I've briefly touched upon, business energy prices, the debt break, the Schwarze Null, Ukraine. How peaceful do we want to be? You know, there's a longing for peace in the East German Delstater, but not. They don't suggest a very responsible way to get there. Those will be the three issues, and then migration. I can't repeat it often enough. It has been a devastating issue for the present government. It needs to be solved by the next government. And there might be a question about how many Nazis do we have in Germany? How extreme are we all of a sudden back again? We need to solve the problems. Yeah, there's two theories here. We have all of a sudden we have 20% new extremists, and we're not the democratic, peaceful, loving country in the middle of Europe. Or there's the other theory that says we have got a couple of serious problems, and as soon as we tackle and solve them, that extremist wing of that AfD and BSW will disappear. I'm personally a supporter of the second theory. I think we really have to work on the problems. We'll always have something like 10% extremists. This is 2024, you know, it's not the 60s anymore. World has become more rough, Germany has become more rough, but this is a new normal, and I think a vibrant democracy like Germany can live with it. Germany and France, still a pivotal relationship for the EU, still something that is very much in the heart of everyone who has seen the development of the European Union after the Second World War. Now you might imply that presently that relationship is not as warm and as cordial, at least to the outside, as it used to be under previous chancellors and presidents. I don't know. I think behind closed doors we are working extremely closely with the French administration, and that is not dependent on any president. I must say one thing, of course, the European Union has also changed. Back in the days when I was young, François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl would write a letter to Jacques Delors, who happened to be a French president of the Commission, making a proposal, and then it was said and done. Those days are gone. The European Union has changed, and there's more actors. Many people would suggest that even that old quad, you know, of the United States, Britain, France, and Germany does not apply any longer to run affairs in NATO, for example. A country like Poland, I keep on mentioning it, and needs to be on board. So I think the nature of the relationship might evolve, but it's still crucial, and I'm still convinced that the first visit of the newly elected German Chancellor will go to Paris and Brussels on the very same day. That is a good old tradition. The nuclear doctrine. The nuclear doctrine, of course, you have to be. Nuclear doctrines are nuclear doctrines. We're talking about serious stuff here, and I don't want to go into details. I wouldn't be too worried. We've seen a lot of irresponsible rhetoric by the Russians all through the last 2 years. This is a little bit more of the same, but there's many intelligence strategists in Russia who know the consequences of irresponsible behavior, and they will not go down that road.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. Could you raise up so she will find you? Yeah. And introduce yourself.
Johan Woll, thank you very much for interesting introduction. My first question is that the US election taught us the importance of incumbency, immigration and economics, or perception of economics perhaps. There's one issue that came up which really hurt the Democrats and might hurt the SPD. That was the sense of, if you like, wokeness, identity, elitism. Is that an issue for you for the SPD? And the other point is that if Trump says, you know, I don't really care about Ukraine anymore, then Europeans are in a sense, yes, we can maybe do something. But I think the issue is for Europe, we can't produce the weapons. We have no capacity to produce what's needed. So we cannot replace the US, even if we could do it in terms of money.
Thank you. And then Solberg. Nei, jo.
Thank you. Two security and defense questions. Norway has cooperated closely with Germany in international operations like Somalia, the Balkans, and Afghanistan. And of course, we're now doing it in Lithuania. We see in international operations that there is a very strict limitation on what German forces can do abroad due to your link between your constitution, your government, and also parliament. And I think that parliament kind of influence on defense and international operations limit what German forces can do abroad. And of course, since the security policy scenario is changing, will you adjust a little on that? And I know it turns down to if you have to adjust the constitution. The second question is, many countries have a problem recruiting professional officers and soldiers, and I understand Germany also does the same. Will you introduce national service again?
Okay.
Yeah, Kate, with your permission, I'll take those questions in a reversed order. That gives me some time to think about the wokeness issue.
Please do.
Security and defense here. Parlamentsvorbehalt, we call that, another difficult word. So it means that there's no military involvement abroad without Parliament giving a yes beforehand, actually. Just in extreme circumstances, we can send troops abroad and get parliamentary approval afterwards. But usually it's Parliament approval before we send troops to a conflict zone. Various governments have tried to work on that. We had commissions on it. The Rühr Commission, other commissions, I've worked on it 2 terms in the Kanzleramt, and we didn't get anywhere. Is it good or bad? The older I get, I say, well, we could live with it, and it will work in the future. As a matter of fact, so far, to be honest, military involvement of the German armed forces anywhere in the world never were hindered by Parliament. Whenever the government came up to Parliament and said, we want to have 1,000 troops or so in Afghanistan, Parliament said yes. Pretty difficult debates. Debates someone who worked in the administration not always liked. And you were sometimes, thinking should go a little faster and all that stuff. But in the end, it works. Same goes for Iraq, where we still are. Same goes for Lebanon, where we still are. Same went for the Djibouti mission, which we ended and stuff like that. So I don't think it will fundamentally change. Certainly not fundamentally, but even not slightly. I don't think new government would, given all the questions we're raising today, pick up that issue. I don't expect that, but it will be rather discontinued dialogue between the executive branch and Parliament in order to get involvement. But then again, I would say, if I look at the world as it is today, the appetite, especially after Afghanistan, let's be realistic, for meaningful missions abroad is somewhat limited. We're just finishing a parliamentary inquiry commission on Afghanistan, highly critical about what we did there, like in this country, like in all the other countries in the world. I don't see it in retrospective that critical, but the overall sense in the German public in politics as such is, unless we don't experience something unheard of, we won't be involved in a mission like Afghanistan in the foreseeable future. So maybe the problem is not as acute as it used to be. Professional officers and all that stuff, absolutely. We've got 180,000 soldiers in the armed forces at the moment, 260,000 overall, 180,000 in uniform. On the officers level, we don't have a problem yet. We still get more than we can take. That has many reasons, among others that we've got very good university, and university education once you enter the armed forces is obligatory. And even if you leave the armed forces after 12 years, you've got a wonderful academic application, and you learn a lot of money if you go up to Daimler or MBB or others and come with a degree in mechanics from University of the Bundeswehr and say, I want to work for you now. So we don't have a problem there. We have it in the lower ranks where people earn more money, for example, in the private sector than they do in the armed forces. This is one of the issues. The other issue is, of course, that we talk about conscription, not because we're lacking people, but also we think that the involvement of the armed forces amongst the population should be more firmly. The cabinet has approved a scheme for that. We not going back to full-fledged conscription as we had until 2011. We'll get to a system sort of between what we have at the moment in your system, I guess, in the Swedish system. So we're checking everyone who's turning 18 and ask them to come up to the authorities and sign in principle up for conscription, and then we see how many we can take, and there won't be any consequences for those who then after all say, I'm not ready and prepared to join the armed forces. But we want to sort of heighten the pressure a little bit, put more limelight on the armed forces, and by getting mail from the government say, you're 18, in principle, we would like to see you serving the armed forces. Come to see us, see a doctor, and then we talk about your future involvement in, public service for 1 year or so. That this will have consequences. We'll see where that goes, but we'll see a continued discussion on that, but not back to the conscription. You and I know back from the days. And now this wokeness thing, I still don't know. It plays a role, of course. It plays a role and played a role, especially in the East German Länder. And if we depart from wokeness, identity is a more serious thing. And I think identity is something, yes, honestly, where many people in my country said in this globalized world, identity is something that is very meaningful for us. And we want to see politicians that do something about it, that underline the meaning of knowing where you belong to, what your identity is, what are your people, what is German or European in times of irregular and uncontrolled migration. Those issues are there and they will play a role, but all this plays rather into the migration crisis issue, which I said repeatedly needs to be solved. And wokeness is something that is, of course, heavily debated. And we'll see some regression on that, I think.
But do you have the same debate about transsexual rights and gay rights?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Now, we had actually a demonstration before Oscarsgate, our embassy, because 10 days ago a law came into force where you can now on a yearly basis go up to the authorities and just say from tomorrow on I'll be male or female. You can do that on a yearly basis. This is the way it is, without being question asked. Well, people argue whether this is the right way to tackle the issue of those who really feel they have been born in the wrong body, whether this wouldn't be too far going and all that stuff. Yes, this is why I mean there will be probably under conservative government, if I put it simply, under a conservative government, there'll be a little less wokeness.
But it plays into the elections.
But it plays into the elections, and you won't see we won't make up in a fundamental different Germany on the 24th of February on that very issue. But I think people there's a general sentiment we've gone too far with woke. I think this is fair to say.
We also had a question on a defense industry in Europe. Can we, replace the US support to Ukraine if Donald Trump's
we cannot, especially not short term and medium term. This is one of the sins of our recent past. For the last 30 years, we've deconstructed our armed forces. We've deconstructed basically our defense industries. and even big players like Rheinmetall and KDNS and others, and there's a couple of experts here in the room, they can't do good overnight what we have not done good the last 30 years. A company that has been very much involved in the defense business after the end of the Cold War. They've seen their engineers go in. They've construction lines. They don't have the raw materials. This is something you cannot turn back overnight. It takes time. I think Zeitenwende, we've done something about it, and all of a sudden we are in a position to produce ammunition again to a meaningful extent. Can we replace, even if we work 24/7 and spend endless money on it? Can we replace what the US are doing? No, we cannot. And by the way, Schuldenbremse and all that stuff, Zelensky is not asking for more German money. We've asked that plenty times. He said, I need ammunition, I need material, I need sophisticated weapons.
And Taurus.
And ammunitions and weapons we don't have to the extent Ukraine would be needing it, and Taurus.
But isn't it a very strange situation in Germany today that the defense minister is the most popular politician?
Yes.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
And so you are as entitled like all of us. Who will be the chancellor candidate for SPD? Boris Pistorius or Olaf Scholz?
Yeah, the simple answer is I don't know. Even SPD doesn't know. Even Pistorius and Scholz do not know. The chancellor is really on his way back from Brazil as we speak. He'll touch down is probably very soon, and then we might find out. I really don't know. If you're in Social Democrats, there would be arguments for Pistorius and for Scholz, but I must say it's a very encouraging signal to round that up, that a defense minister is the most popular politician in Germany. It means actually that if you speak some inconvenient truth in a difficult time, you can be very, very successful politicians. Whether that ends up at as Kanzlerkandidat of SPD, we'll probably know before the weekend or over the weekend.
We are living in interesting times, so stay tuned. Have a nice day, and thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you, Kate.